Hey folks, welcome back to The Probate Agent. My name is Anthony Nitz, and I'm glad you're back. Glad you came back and to continue the story where I left off on our last episode. I was telling you about how I was getting, ongoing probate referrals from about 25 attorneys, and how, there's really no other agents who were consistently marketing to attorneys at the time. And then the market crashed in 2007. It changed everything.
So the big question is this: how are ordinary agents just like us supposed to stand out in the overly crowded real estate space while living a great lifestyle without having to go broke or radically change what we're already doing? Probate is the answer, and this series will show you how. I'm Anthony Nitz, and welcome to The Probate Agent.
So yes, it was about the end of 2007, and the crash had taken full hold of the real estate market. People were shocked that their homes were no longer flying off the shelf at ridiculous prices. And guys, it happened all in the blink of an eye. And I remember when I went into a listing appointment, I had to explain that because of the state of the market and because they wanted to sell quickly, that they had to price it ahead of the market. Well, where was the market going? It was going down, right? So, what that meant was that they actually had to price it below the comparable sales. I explained to them that if it was in fact worth more than whatever we price it at below comparable sales, then the buyers would increase their offers, right? Just because of demand. Now, these folks outright accused me of being a crook and just trying to force them to underprice the home for a quick sale just to make a quick buck, because after all, I was just a salesperson, right? And, that disturbed me. It disturbed me. I had never, ever operated like that in my life. And when people say things like that, it bothers you, But what can you do? Because in the end, the end result for them was that, they hired another agent. That other agent told them some great story. They priced it at the current comparable sales price. And then they chased the market down. And ultimately, about 8 months later, sold their family's home for almost $100,000 less than if they had taken my recommendation. Okay. How much could that have affected the heirs? How much could that have benefited the heirs had they just sold it under market value? But, stuff like that, it didn't matter. Market shifts didn't really affect me because I was selling probate properties after all, right? People are dying every day. So I had sustainable and market-proof business, right? Well, not exactly, because, for me, I believed that it was sustainable just because of that fact. Like I said, people are dying every day. But despite the number of homeowners who were passing away every single day, I was hit something that caught me off guard. A couple things, actually. You see, I believe that because estate planning, probates, and wills and trusts, they were the mainstay of the attorneys that I was working with, that they would not be affected either. I believed that they would all quietly sit by, with me and watch the market shift, pass us right on by, and continue living the high life. Boy, was I wrong. It wasn't until the end of 2008, early 2009, that, I really started feeling the pinch. I noticed increasingly that the referrals were definitely not flowing like normal. What could be happening? But it really wasn't hard to figure out. Even though people were dying and their heirs had to manage the property, they were finding out, in a lot of cases, that the property was worth less than what was owed. There was no equity to share amongst the heirs. There wasn't even enough equity to pay the executor to manage the property. So families were simply having a fire sale, selling all the stuff inside the house, the furniture, the appliances, knickknacks, pawning off any collectibles, try to make the a little inheritance. But there was no point whatsoever of listing the property with me, or anybody for that matter, and going through all the hassle of doing a short sale. As a matter of fact, at the time, short sales weren't even hardly a thing yet. The families would just let it foreclose and be done. Just let it go. Why all that hassle? What do they get out of it? In some cases, they even rented it out or lived in it up to the very day when the sheriff evicted them. It was getting crazy with that, at that time with the market and everything. But because attorneys get paid based on a percentage of the entire probate estate, which includes the house, which is typically the highest price ticket in the estate, and people were not even going through the probate process, the attorneys weren't making sales either. The attorneys were being heavily affected by the downturn in the market. In fact, many of them, with their expensive homes, their cars, their lifestyles, were also finding themselves in the same situation that most of other people and their clients were in. They were scraping for pennies. They were getting foreclosure notices too. It was getting ugly. But then a new opportunity presented itself. You see, if you were around then, you would remember that at the beginning of the crash, the banks, they didn't even know what to do. They were not prepared for this crash. It was supposed to go on forever, right? 20% increase in values every year, right? So, foreclosures, which were almost non-existent in 2005, 2006, suddenly became a huge part of their portfolios. And short sales became a necessary evil for them, because otherwise they would end up with tens of thousands of properties on their hands, and they'd be responsible for the properties. They didn't want to go to property management or maintenance or anything like that. So the bank started doing something called a loan modification. This came about because the banks didn't want to own the property, like I said, but they were also starting to get a lot of pressure from the government because of all the cries of predatory lending, which in my opinion, I thought was a bunch of garbage. My take on it, just because of the way I operate, I guess, if you sign the loan documents that had horrible terms, it's no one's fault but your own. Okay, but that's for a whole other episode. All right. In any case, because of this new thing called loan modifications and the difficulties that the attorneys had, and because there was no real regulation on the loan modifications, lots of attorneys, including all the ones that I was working with, jumped into loan modifications head first. They were offering loan modification services for substantial upfront fees, and eventually for even a percentage of the modification that they made. The interesting thing about the loan modifications was that they had a huge failure rate. At best, most of them were just delaying the inevitable. That's all they were doing. And most of those homeowners were still foreclosed on and still lost their home, even after paying thousands to an attorney. But it's just what it was. That was the market. Some were getting the loan modifications, but not many. But because many of these attorneys, were starting to recover financially, or at least stay afloat during this turmoil offered by offering loan mods, none of them were focusing on probate. Basically for the reasons I just mentioned. So they were kind of going, okay, back, breath of fresh air, we're making money. They had to work harder than they did on probate, that's for sure. But they had a sustainable business that they could have and feed their families, right? And I thought to myself, that's okay, no problem. I'll just swing into the foreclosure and short sale market. And since I already had relationships with these attorneys, they should be totally happy referring me to people that needed to sell their home via a short sale, right? Well, surprise, surprise, I was wrong again. You see, there's a funny thing that happens to relationships when it's based on money. And what I mean is, in the past, I would sell a probate house, and because of the way I do it, I sell it fast, really fast. And the attorney would get paid all their probate fees, and they were totally happy with that. And I was happy, and everybody else was happy. But now, there was no real benefit for the attorneys to refer their short sale clients to me. If they negotiated the short sale, they were only making about $1,000 to $3,000, which was much less than they would on an average probate case. So in addition to that, they were only, about 50% probability at that time that the short sale would even get approved anyways, if they were getting involved in that, about 50% before it was even taken back by the bank. So their average customer value, was decreased significantly because of it. So suddenly these attorneys started looking at me like I was the greedy wolf who was just trying to make a killing off of their hard work and efforts and give nothing in return, by taking referrals from them. At first, they started asking me for referral fees. And honestly, between you and me, I was okay with that at the time, because it was the difference between, me and my family starving as well, or keeping my bills paid. But we all know that unless someone has a broker's license, we can't pay referral fees legally, right? My broker put a stop to it pretty darn quick. So suddenly, those attorneys were dust in the wind. They were just dust in the wind. Sure, I could have paid them out of my own pocket and skirted the law, but I wasn't willing to risk my license for that. And then some of the remaining attorneys started asking for a fee per lead. They were selling short sale leads. In some cases, up to $1,000. Now, there's nothing wrong with buying leads, because lots of agents do it, but you know as well as I do that there's a night and day difference between a referral and a lead. The referrals I got for the probate sales were almost a certainty that I got the listing, unless, of course, they had a nearby relative who was an agent that they wanted to use, right? Well, leads, on the other hand, in many cases, they never heard of me. The attorney never told them I was going to call, and because of their situation, they were very defensive, and they would barely give me the time of day. Also, because it was foreclosures, I, again, was looked at as the bad guy just trying to steal people's money in the form of commissions. It was really a bit taxing and, kind of made me weary. So, in a couple short years, my entire probate business was basically gone. Those attorneys were basically tainted and grumpy because they went through all this, as well. In fact, about half of the attorneys that I was working with, after a few years into this whole loan modification wave, they ended up getting either disbarred or in a couple of cases went to jail for predatory practices and or, fraud, other things. But, at that time I was glad not to be associated with them. But in the meantime, I still had to survive. I had to do something that kept me standing out and profitable. I knew that probate was still a very viable option, and I wasn't about to let it go, because I knew, just like before, the competition was easy to beat. I just had to figure out that next step. I knew that new attorneys who were not tainted by the market crash were coming into the marketplace and were still a good option. But honestly, I didn't want to have to rely on them. It took me a little while to figure it out, but I did. We'll talk more about that on the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to subscribe right here where you're listening to us right now, and any of your other social media platforms. And leave feedback for me. It's really important to me, and it helps us out. Do you have a question that you want answered live on the show? Go to theprobateagent.com to submit your question or even to get an opportunity to be interviewed. For my agent friends, you'll also find additional content and some freebies there that you can download right now. Until next time, let's put the pro back into probate.